fog clung to the streets of London like a hesitant curtain. The mourning Lady Eleanor Harcourt returned to the capital, and it seemed even the city itself paused to study her. After a year secluded at her family's countryside estate, tending ledgers, holding creditors at bay, and learning the quiet strength of self-reliance, she stepped once more into the restless heart of society. Her carriage wheels hummed over cobblestones slick with early spring rain, and the scent of coal smoke curled through the air, mingling with the faint perfume drifting from flower sellers preparing for the season's first wave of guests. She felt London breathing again, hungry for gossip, eager for novelty, ready to crown or crush any who dared present themselves. And she stepped into its jaws with her chin lifted. Eleanor had always been a creature of calm bearing, though no one seemed to notice until her misfortunes gave the world new angles by which to judge her. At 24, she was handsome in a way that frustrated society women, elegant without artifice, graceful without affectation. Yet she'd long learned that beauty, unless encrusted with wealth and buoyed by fashionable alliances, offered only fleeting protection. A baronet's daughter, neither rich nor pitiably poor, she occupied that ambiguous middle territory where one misstep could tilt her into obscurity. And her misstep, in the eyes of many, had been to retreat from London after a suitor disappointed her. The truth was more complex, but truth seldom stood a chance against the entertainments whispered behind fans. Her first reappearance in society was to be a charitable musicale hosted by Lady Wetherby, a dowager whose affection for gossip was outweighed only by her mastery of hosting. Eleanor entered the drawing-room with the quiet poise of someone who had braced for unkind eyes. Lace draperies softened the glow of 100 candles, and the gentle tinkling of a pianoforte floated like delicate glass over the hum of conversation. Yet the moment Eleanor crossed the threshold, the room seemed to contract, adjusting itself to accommodate her presence. Recognition flickered across faces, surprise in some, calculation in others, and in a few, the unmistakable glint of anticipated scandal. She moved among the guests with a polite composure, offering curtsies, accepting compliments, expressing admiration for musical selections she scarcely heard. Her heart thudded with an inconvenient rhythm. It had been long since she'd stood under so many eyes, and she felt their curiosity probing her like a needle seeking weakness. She took refuge near a modest arrangement of early roses, allowing her gloved fingertips to brush their petals. The fragrance steadied her. But peace was fleeting. A familiar voice, one she had hoped the walls themselves might swallow, slipped through the air like poison disguised as perfume. "Lady Eleanor." The greeting dripped with feigned warmth. "Back at last." She turned, and there he stood, Mr. Alastair Greaves, impeccably dressed, impeccably smug, and impeccably unchanged. He was a man who fed on the discomfort of others as though it were sustenance. Once, he had courted her with polished charm, only to cast her aside when a wealthier heiress caught his eye. Now he regarded her with the patronizing amusement of someone who believed himself safely beyond reproach. "You look remarkably well," he continued, his smile thin and curved like a blade. "I confess, we had wondered whether country life had suited you a bit too thoroughly." A few listeners drifted closer, drawn by the scent of potential humiliation. The air tightened. Eleanor's pulse fluttered against her ribs, but her voice, when it emerged, was steady. "I am pleased to see London unchanged. Some things, it seems, possess admirable consistency." He smirked, displeased by her refusal to squirm. "Indeed. Though one cannot help but notice," he paused, ensuring a small audience, "that a year is a considerable absence for a lady still seeking her prospects. No husband yet." The words struck like a slap. Even the music seemed to falter, the pianist's fingers hesitating for the briefest instant. Several heads turned. A murmured "oh" fluttered through the room. Eleanor felt heat rise beneath her skin, but she would not give him the pleasure of seeing her flinch. She held his gaze, letting silence form its own rebuke. Her response, calm yet cutting, was still forming when a new sound stole her attention, the unmistakable rumble of wheels outside, heavy yet refined, followed by the crisp bark of a well-trained coachman. The guests near the windows tilted their heads. one lady whispered. That crest, surely not. Eleanor didn't need to hear the full sentence to know what crest she meant. She recognized the rhythm of those wheels, the disciplined stops of that driver. Her breath caught, for this was the one thing she had not expected today, a public acknowledgement. A servant entered, bowing with unusual deference. Lady Eleanor Harcourt, he announced, your carriage awaits. Not a carriage. Your carriage. An immediate rustle swept the room. Eager eyes darted toward the street, where, just visible through the drawn curtains, stood a deep navy coach adorned with a silver emblem unmistakable to anyone versed in aristocratic power, the crest of the Duke of Ashford. Conversations dissolved into fragmented astonishment. The Ashford crest? But he is rarely in London. Why would his carriage fetch her? Are they acquainted? Mr. Greaves stared, his confidence draining like wine from a shattered glass. Confusion warred with disbelief on his face, then something uglier, fear of irrelevance. He looked at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time, searching for an explanation that did not exist in any social manual he had ever read. Eleanor inclined her head with perfect grace, though her heart hammered. "If you will excuse me," she said softly. She crossed the room with an elegance she did not feel, every step punctuated by the prickling awareness of 100 eyes tracking her. Her gloves trembled slightly as she accepted her cloak from a footman, and as she descended the steps to the waiting carriage, the chill air kissed her heated cheeks. The Duke's coachman bowed deeply before helping her inside. The door shut with a decisive click that sounded, to her ears, like the closing of an old chapter. Inside the carriage, the cushions bore the faint scent of sandalwood and hearth smoke, familiar, unsettling, and comforting in equal measure. She leaned back, exhaling the breath she'd been holding since Greaves uttered his calculated cruelty. Her fingers traced the embroidered crest stitched into the velvet interior. The Duke had not needed to send this carriage, certainly not publicly. Their arrangement had been discreet by design. Yet he had sent it, unmistakably, deliberately. As the carriage rolled forward, carrying her away from the suffocating heat of that room, a new unease stirred within her. She wondered what the Duke wanted, why he had chosen this moment to reveal an association no one was meant to suspect. She wondered, too, whether this gesture signaled not mere protection of her dignity but a shift in his own intentions. The city blurred past, lamps flickering like watchful eyes. When the carriage finally turned toward the familiar route leading to Ashford House, anticipation pooled in her stomach. A sealed note lay on the seat beside her, bearing the Duke's unmistakably elegant hand. "We must speak this evening. Come at once. Ashford." The words were simple, but the urgency behind them was unmistakable. As the carriage surged deeper into the heart of London, Eleanor realized that the humiliation she had endured earlier was merely the first tremor of something far larger, something that would either fortify her world or shake it apart entirely. And for the first time since returning to the city, she felt not dread, but a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. The carriage halted before Ashford House with a soft jolt, its lanterns casting trembling circles of gold across the damp stone steps. Eleanor's breath formed a thin cloud as she descended, her pulse thudding like a discreet drum beneath her ribs. The great townhouse loomed above her, its windows glowing with steady, dignified light, neither ostentatious nor humble, but unmistakably authoritative. It was a residence built not to impress but to assert, the kind of place whose very silence carried political consequence. Entering it always felt like crossing a threshold into a quieter, colder world where emotions were polished away like fingerprints. Tonight, however, something felt different, as if the house itself waited. A footman escorted her through the marble foyer, where the air smelled faintly of beeswax and distant hearths. Portraits of Hawthorne ancestors lined the walls, stern men and serene women whose gazes seemed trained on Eleanor with impassive assessment. She had stood before them only twice since her secret marriage, both occasions brisk and formal, each reinforcing the careful distance she and the Duke had agreed upon. Their union had been born of necessity rather than affection, a bargain struck with clear-eyed practicality, her family's estate secured, his political image stabilized by marrying a woman of respectable birth and irreproachable character. They had signed the register quietly at a country church, parted the next morning, and maintained a deliberate separation until court approval could be secured. It had been an arrangement without tenderness, or so she had believed. Tonight's summons unsettled her. It was too abrupt, too visible, too purposeful. And the carriage, his carriage, had shattered all boundaries of discretion. A question formed at the back of her mind, unwelcome yet persistent. Why now? She was shown not to the formal drawing-room but to the Duke's private study, a signal in itself. The door opened to reveal Nicholas Hawthorne standing near the fireplace, the flames casting shifting amber across the sharp planes of his face. He was a man sculpted by restraint, tall and immaculately composed, with eyes the cool gray of winter seas. Yet when he looked at her, something unguarded flickered beneath the surface, brief but undeniable. "Eleanor," he said, her name carried by a voice low and deliberate, "thank you for coming." She dipped her head. "Your note conveyed urgency." "It did," he replied, then gestured toward a chair set opposite his own. "Please." She sat, smoothing her gloves over her wrists to steady her nerves. He remained standing for a moment, as if weighing how to begin, and the pause stretched taut between them until he finally crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair before her. The fire crackled softly, a modest accompaniment to the tension coiling in the air. "I heard what occurred at Lady Weatherby's," he said. "With Greaves." The humiliation returned in a slow, creeping wave. She kept her composure. "It was nothing I could not endure. It was something I should not have allowed to occur." His voice tightened with displeasure, not at her, but at himself. "You were subjected to insult, and I made the mistake of assuming our discretion would shield you rather than expose you." She blinked, startled not by the words but by the sentiment behind them. "I do not hold you responsible." "Yet I am." His gaze met hers fully, and she sensed that he was fighting some internal reserve, pushing past habits honed by years of political distance. "Our agreement may have been practical, but it does not excuse inattention. You are my wife." The phrase settled between them like a thrown stone rippling through still water. Until now, their marriage had lived largely on paper and in whispered logistics. To hear him speak the word with quiet conviction unsettled something within her. "I sent my carriage for you because I intend to correct the perception that you are unprotected," he continued. "It was an error to remain entirely separate. London must see that you stand under the shield of my name." Eleanor studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the clipped precision in his phrasing. This was not a man accustomed to explaining himself. "You sent more than a carriage," she said softly. "You made a statement." "Yes." His expression shifted just slightly, the faintest flicker of vulnerability crossing his eyes. "And it appears I am prepared to make another." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached for a small velvet box resting on the side table and placed it gently before her. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She wore it during her first presentation at court." Eleanor opened the box. Nestled within was a brooch of deep sapphire encircled by delicate filigree, elegant, noble, unmistakably personal. Her breath hitched as she touched the cool metal, the color mirroring the midnight gleam of the Ashford crest. "I do not give gifts lightly," he said. "This is an acknowledgement." She raised her eyes. "Of what, Your Grace?" A beat of silence followed, taut and fragile. "Of the respect I hold for you," he replied, "and of the realization that I have underestimated your strength." You faced Greaves without flinching. Many would have retreated. You did not. She was struck by the quiet sincerity in his tone. It softened something she had kept fortified since their union, a guardedness forged by necessity. "I endured because I have had to," she said. "Circumstances shape resilience whether one wishes it or not." "True." He leaned forward slightly, the firelight catching the controlled determination in his gaze. But fortitude without bitterness is rare. You possess that. He paused, then added, almost reluctantly, and I find that I value it more than I anticipated. The admission folded itself around her like unexpected warmth. She had respected him from the moment their arrangement formed, for his candor and his refusal to feign affection he did not feel. But respect was not affection, and affection was not trust. Their marriage existed in the quiet space between duty and possibility. Now, for the first time, she sensed the faint stirring of something beyond obligation. A knock interrupted the air between them. A butler entered with a discreet bow. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. Word has spread regarding the carriage. Guests from Lady Weatherby's are already inquiring. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Already? Yes, Your Grace. I suspect the matter will reach Whitehall before morning. Of course it will, he murmured, then dismissed the butler with a nod. Once the door closed, he turned back to Eleanor. This accelerates matters. In what way? She asked. He stood again, pacing softly before the hearth. Your presence at court will be demanded sooner than anticipated. When the Queen summons you, our marriage will become public knowledge. I intended to ease you into that world, but now, he exhaled slowly, I must prepare you. She straightened, both apprehensive and intrigued. Prepare me how? His eyes met hers with clear, steady intensity. By ending the distance between us. We are husband and wife not merely in title but in consequence. What affects you affects me, and vice versa. If society is to judge us, it will judge a united front. He paused, then added with quiet conviction, I would have us stand as allies, Eleanor, not strangers bound by parchment. The words stirred something deep within her, something she had tried to ignore since the day she signed her name beside his. Allies, not strangers. Perhaps even more, if courage allowed it. She rose from her seat, the sapphire brooch catching the firelight as though it had awakened with her. Then I will stand with you, she said. Not because duty demands it, but because you have offered honesty, and I cannot refuse that. A subtle, profound shift passed through his expression, softening its hard edges. He bowed his head once, not as a duke acknowledging a wife, but as a man acknowledging a woman whose strength he had come to admire. Thank you. Before either could say more, another knock sounded. A messenger delivered a sealed envelope bearing the royal insignia. Nicholas accepted it with a measured breath, glanced at its contents, then extended the letter to her. The Queen requests your presence at Spring Court, he said quietly. 3 days from now. Eleanor felt the world tilt, not with fear but with the weight of inevitability. Their discreet arrangement was ending. The eyes of London would turn toward them, hungry and relentless. Yet beneath the uncertainty, she felt a steadying certainty rise within her. She would not face it alone. Nicholas stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of the fire blurred with the warmth of his presence. Do not fear the court, he said. Fear only standing before it without knowing where I stand. He paused, then added, in a tone that brushed the edges of confession, and I stand with you. The moment held, quiet, intimate, unguarded, until the flames shifted and cast new shadows. Whatever awaited them in the days ahead, the fragile distance between them had changed. And as she left Ashford House that night, the brooch warm against her palm, Eleanor felt the first true stirrings of something both terrifying and wondrous, the beginning of trust. The morning of the Spring Court dawned with a pale, pearly light that seeped slowly over London, softening the city's sharp edges and lending an almost dreamlike hush to its restless streets. Eleanor woke before the servants knocked, her sleep shallow, her thoughts restless with anticipation. Today, she would step into Buckingham Palace not as an unnoticed baronet's daughter, but as the Duchess of Ashford, revealed, acknowledged, and irrevocably bound to the man whose name she bore. The recognition thrilled and unsettled her in equal measure. She rose from bed with controlled breath, grounding herself in the simple knowledge that she would not face the day alone. A small team of maids prepared her for the presentation, their movements practiced but reverent, as though aware they were dressing a woman on the cusp of transformation. Layers of sapphire silk, chosen to echo the Ashford colors, settled around her like liquid twilight. The gown's structured bodice emphasized her poise, while delicate embroidery traced patterns of blooming thistles across the hem, a subtle nod to the Duke's northern estates. Her hair was arranged in an elegant twist, adorned with a single sapphire pin. And when she pinned the Duke's mother's brooch to her shoulder, it felt as though she were fastening courage itself to her gown. Ashford House was unusually silent as she descended the staircase, though the quiet felt less like absence and more like expectancy. At the bottom, Nicholas waited. He wore formal evening attire appropriate for court, a dark coat, crisp cravat, and the Order of the Garter ribbon across his chest. The ensemble lent him a severe, almost forbidding elegance, yet when he looked at her, something softened within the austere lines of his expression. "You look—" He paused, visibly searching for a word precise enough. "Undeniable." Eleanor felt warmth rise in her chest. "And you," she said, "look very prepared to face the monarchy." "One must, in my position." He stepped closer, the faint scent of cedar and smoke surrounding him. "But the monarchy is not what concerns me today." "What does then?" she asked, though her heart already knew. "You," he said simply. Before she could reply, he lifted a necklace from a velvet case, a string of fine sapphires with a single teardrop gem at its center. He fastened it around her neck with careful, almost reverent hands. His fingers grazed her skin, and the breath caught in her throat. When he stepped back, his gaze lingered, not with possession but with a dawning recognition of something far more fragile. "Shall we?" he asked. Together, they entered the carriage, its polished wood gleaming like a promise. As they traveled toward Buckingham Palace, London unfurled around them in a blur of lamplight, fluttering fans, and curious glances from onlookers who recognized the Ashford crest. Smoke curled from chimneys, mingling with early blossoms that clung to the breeze. The city seemed to lean closer, eager for revelation. When they arrived, the palace rose before them in a blaze of white stone and gilded ornamentation, its grandeur humbled only by the quiet weight of tradition. Carriages lined the forecourt like obedient soldiers, and finely dressed aristocrats streamed toward the entrance in shimmering waves. Whispers trailed in their wake as Nicholas offered his arm to Eleanor and escorted her inside. Within the palace, chandeliers dripped light like melting gold, illuminating a hall alive with rustling skirts and murmured greetings. Courtiers positioned themselves with practiced ease, each step measured to avoid impropriety. The scent of polished marble, beeswax, and floral arrangements mingled in the air. Eleanor felt the collective gaze shift toward her the moment they crossed the threshold. "Is that?" "It must be. The Duke of Ashford has brought a lady." "When was he married?" "I heard nothing of it. Surely this will cause comment." The whispers rolled through the ballroom like a gathering tide. Eleanor felt their weight, but Nicholas's arm remained steady beneath her hand, anchoring her. They approached the dais where Queen Victoria received her guests. The young monarch stood radiant and poised, her presence carrying a serene gravity that belied her years. When Nicholas bowed and Eleanor curtsied, the Queen regarded them with measured interest. "Your Grace," the Queen said, addressing Nicholas, "we welcome your return to court. And this must be your Duchess." "She is," Nicholas replied, his voice firm but respectful. "Lady Eleanor Hawthorne." The Queen's gaze landed on Eleanor with a spark of approval. "We are pleased to receive you. England has long awaited a Duchess for Ashford." The acknowledgement fell upon the crowd like a stone into water, rippling outward, undeniable and final. Whatever doubts or questions lingered in the minds of onlookers dissolved before the Queen's endorsement. Eleanor rose with new steadiness, feeling a shift within herself, the acceptance of a role she had not sought but was no longer afraid to claim. As the presentation concluded and they stepped back into the ballroom, the atmosphere changed. Guests approached with polite curiosity, offering congratulations, though still tinged with the sharpness of speculative interest. Through it all, Nicholas remained close, an unspoken vow pulsing between them. But peace, like luck, was seldom uninterrupted. Mr. Alastair Greaves appeared through the parting crowd, his face pale, his posture deceptively polite. He approached with a stiff bow, his expression strained into something resembling civility. "Your Grace, your Duchess." His eyes flicked toward Eleanor with a mixture of disbelief and resentment. "I must offer my congratulations, though I confess the news reaches me with some surprise." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Most news does, if one does not listen closely," she said. A muscle in his jaw ticked. "I might have spoken differently earlier today," he said, "had I known she possessed such illustrious connections." Nicholas stepped forward with lethal calm. "Then perhaps you should speak with more care regardless of a lady's connections." Greaves swallowed. "I meant no offense." "On the contrary," the Duke said, his tone deceptively soft, "you meant precisely that. Allow me to clarify something so there may be no further misunderstanding." He extended his hand slightly toward Eleanor. "You address my wife, sir." The words were quiet, but they struck the air like a hammer on iron. A collective gasp rippled around them. Greaves's face drained of color. He bowed stiffly before retreating into the crowd, a man suddenly rendered insignificant in the very arena where he once thrived. Eleanor exhaled, realizing only now how tightly she had been holding her breath. Nicholas turned to her, his voice lower, gentler. "You bore that with extraordinary composure." "Because you stood beside me," she replied. For a moment, neither looked away. The ballroom, with its glitter and murmurs, seemed to fade to the edges of perception. Nicholas's expression was no longer inscrutable. It was open, resolute, and alive with something he had held too tightly for too long. "I did not marry you for political convenience," he said. "At least, not entirely. Even then, I knew that if I did not claim you, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I feared that you would slip beyond my reach." Her breath trembled. "I feared loving a man whose world could swallow mine. But you have shown me your world is not a force meant to consume." "It is a place I wish to share," he said. "If you will let me." She stepped closer, her voice hardly more than a whisper. "I already have." Their hands met, his hesitant yet certain, hers steady yet trembling. It was not the clasp of political allies, nor the touch of strangers bound by duty. It was something more fragile, more profound. When they returned to the center of the ballroom, the crowd parted instinctively, the space around them opening like a curtain. Together they stood under the brilliance of the chandeliers, not as a secret arrangement, but as a united force, respected, seen, and, at last, understood. Greaves watched from the fringes, diminished, irrelevant. His earlier mockery now echoed back at him as something small and pitiful. Eleanor lifted her chin, the sapphire necklace gleaming like a promise against her skin. Nicholas offered his arm once more, and she accepted it with a quiet certainty that felt like destiny settling into its rightful place. As the musicians resumed their graceful melody, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford stepped forward, not as symbols, but as partners, finally walking the same path. And in that moment, Eleanor understood that strength was not only in enduring, but in choosing whom to trust beside her.